Okay, so welcome everybody. My name is Joaquin Roca, and this is the Skillshare class, Killing Hierarchy, Organization Design for Startups. I'm going to share my screen here, which means you're going to lose my face, and you're going to see the PowerPoint presentation. Again, I can follow along with your questions on Twitter. So if you use the hashtag modes and mention me at Joaquin_V_Roca, I'll be able to take and answer your questions. This is my email address in case you have questions in between now and the next class. And you can always check more about me on my website, joaquinroca.com. That's me up there. So who am I? My name is Joaquin. I've been working with startups for about 2.5 years now, helping them think about the people side of their organizations. So things like organization culture and organization structure, group process, and such. Why am I qualified to do that? Well, I've been working in broadly the field of human resources for about 15 years now. I'm what they would call an ABD, all but dissertation, studying to get my PhD at Columbia University in organizational psychology. So I have the experience, the qualifications, hopefully, to provide you guys some insight. Like I said, if you have questions throughout, please use my Twitter handle, at Joaquin_V_Roca. Use the hashtag #modes so that people can follow along with your questions. And I'll do my best to answer them as they come in. So today we're going to be talking about the modes model. Next time we're going to be talking about another model that I use for organization design called AEIOU. I'll give you some action steps, some pointers of how to move forward. And then finally in the third session, we'll do more of a Q&A, project review, and we'll close out. So I have a question for you all, and I'd love for you to use this Twitter hashtag modes to answer it for me. Let me know. What do you think organization design is? So quickly, if you can tell me, what is organization design? Let me switch back up. I think I just lost. I lost the slideshow. Sorry about that. I'm opening it back up. Okay, there we go. So, my question to you all. What is organization design? I'll give you a couple of seconds there. And I'm going to share my screen again. So, organization design. Organization design, this is a model that you can find in the Valve handbook. If you haven't looked at Valve's handbook, the employee handbook for the company Valve, you should. It's a really great read. And it talks a lot about organization design and structure. And what they did here was they tried to graphically depict their very unique organization structure, the architecture of their organization here. Right? So you might have one person on top and everybody else underneath. Everybody on top, one person below. Crazy network, just a bunch of dots and then one person who's an outlier. A nice interconnected, organized network. So these are different depictions that employees thought of when they thought of Valve's organization design. My definition for organization design is the pattern of relationships and procedures that define how an organization functions. So when we think about organization design, you're going to want to think about a couple of different things that we'll get to today, but generally, what is organization design? Organization design is the pattern of relationships and procedures that create an organization. Got a couple of questions here, or a response there. So organization design is the idea of structuring an organization to achieve a specific mission. Excellent. So yeah, it's this idea of how do we create an organization, how do we structure it, and how do we work together to achieve our mission as an organization. So thank you to Peter for writing in. Here's a couple of diagrams I created when I was helping Sumall. If you don't know who Sumall is, it's a great company that I work with a lot. SUMALL.com, Sumall. And I was helping them think about, what is the organization design? What does their organization look like? At the top here, oh man, I could have done a better job with the colors, but this was an attempt at a traditional hierarchy, which didn't fit really well with SumAll. It didn't fit with the culture, didn't fit with the lived reality of it. So that we kind of struck at. We said that's not the way that SumAll works. We looked at maybe some overlapping Venn diagrams where people have different functional responsibilities, but then they have cross-functional responsibilities, and there's a lot of different linkages. And that felt a little bit closer, better, but not quite right. Even this node diagram here, while it felt somewhat accurate, it didn't really meet our lived experience. So we had to dig a little bit deeper and to really think about what was organization design in SumAll. And so that was the impetus for me to create the modes model that I'll be presenting to you all today. First thing I'd like to tell you, though, is that your organization design is likely to change over time. Your organization design should fit your culture, it should fit your strategy, and it should fit the stage of your business. So your business, as you're just starting up, maybe you're 3, 4 founders, or a founding team of 8 or 9 with the founders and the first few hires, it's going to be a very different organization design, obviously, than a 1,000-person organization. And that's okay. But you have to make sure to check in every so often to make sure that your organization design is continually fitting your mission and what you need it to be doing. So, organization design. There are 2 parts of organization design. Let me first hit this screen here. So this is just another model that I created to help startups think about where they are in their lifespan. So like I said, organization design, and even your culture, everything you do is going to depend and be contingent on where you are in the lifespan of your organization. In this place, right, in this model, I go over 4 major parts of the organization when you're scaling from 2 to 100. So you think about co-founder relationships at the beginning, building a team after you've grown a bit. If you build a successful team, you'll be able to develop an organization, you get larger, and then as you get larger, you're thinking about maintaining agility at scale. That's a place where you might not even know everybody in your organization anymore. You might not know their names, maybe just their faces. You might not know what they do as you get closer and closer to that 100, 150, 200 person mark. Within each phase, you're going to go through this scope cycle. So the start, chaos, organizing, producing, and expanding. So this is just a model to help you think about where you are as an organization and how that might have an effect, an impact on your organization design. So organization design is actually 2 separate things. You're going to think of your architecture. So the architecture is the formal lines of authority, the division of labor, and it's oftentimes represented by an organization chart. Your architecture ranges anywhere from fluid to static. So a fluid architecture is going to be a place where your reporting relationships change day to day, your titles might change a bit, maybe you don't even have titles. A static architecture would be something more along the lines of the United States government, where your reporting relationships are very well laid out by the Constitution or a state constitution, and also the division of labor, right? So you have 3 branches of our federal government, for instance. That division of labor is very well laid out. You know exactly how that works. So that's a very static architecture, whereas most startups, early stage startups, are going to have a very fluid architecture that will change from time to time. The next part of your organization design is process. So there's architecture, but then there's also process. Process is actually the way shit gets done in an organization, right? So these are sometimes called standard operating procedures. And processes can range anywhere from very standardized to ad hoc. So ad hoc is just kind of in the moment you come up with a process, you figure out how to do something, you work together, you get it done. Standardized is, again, if you think about the United States government, we lay out laws and we write them down in our Constitution to think about exactly how do we make law? How do our lawmakers work together? How do the different branches of the government, the executive, the judicial and the legislative branch, how do they work together? And those processes are very well laid out. So again, your process can go anywhere from ad hoc to standardized. Your architecture, anywhere from static to fluid. Any questions right now? I'm looking on my Twitter feed here. I haven't seen anything new. So it sounds good. Any questions, comments, anything you'd like to add, please just put that up there at Joaquin_V_Roca and throw in #modes. And we'll be able to have a little bit more of an interactive class than this one-way class that we're having right now. So next thing I'd like to discuss is the modes model. So the modes model, what is it? Well, if you take your architecture and your process and you think about both dimensions of architecture, right? So anywhere from fluid to static, and your process anywhere from ad hoc to standardized, you'll get a 2x2 model. And that's the modes model. Modes standing for the model for organization design, modes. And in the modes, we have 2x2 that creates 4 different modes of organization. The first one I call the sandbox. Okay, so when you have ad hoc procedures and fluid architecture, you're in what I call the sandbox. The next model of organization design, the next mode, is the forest, right? Again, you still have ad hoc procedures, but you have a much more static, rigid architecture. If you have a fluid architecture and standardized processes, you'll have what I call the fractal organization. And then finally, to complete our 2x2, the 4th mode for organization design, that is static architecture and standardized processes. That's what we call the hive. So again, we have 4 modes for our organization design: the sandbox, the forest, the fractal, and the hive. So let's take a look at the sandbox. This type of organization, right, is generally a really high commitment organization. That's probably because these are usually early stage startups, right? If you have ad hoc procedures and you have fluid organization architecture, you're going to have a place where everybody's just getting the work done. Everybody knows what everybody else does because you have such a small organization that you're talking to each other every day, all day, right? And that creates this idea of a sandbox. Everybody's just going for it. You kind of have an understanding of who's working with you, who's playing with you, and what you're doing, what the goals are, because you're so small, such a tight-knit organization, right? So again, you don't need to think too much about standardizing your procedures or your architecture in this place, right? Early stage startups are very typical of this. The organization I mentioned earlier, Valve, which is a software design company, game design company actually, they, from my outside view, seem to have a sandbox at scale, which is very rare. They're a very large, billion-dollar-plus organization, and they operate seemingly as a sandbox, right? So people get to do what they want with whom they want in terms of producing at work at Valve. So these organizations, you have really strong feelings of ownership, deep commitment. Iteration can happen really quickly at an early stage startup that's a sandbox because everybody's in the room together. You can discuss a strategic shift really quickly with everyone and move to execution very quickly. The weakness around a sandbox organization, lack of clarity around vision, right? So sometimes, especially you have a sandbox at scale, not everybody's going to be on the same page, right? If you don't have that formal architecture or processes, you're not going to have everybody on the same page. Productivity is also really highly dependent on strong interpersonal bonds. So the feeling in the group and the organization, your ability to work together is really going to have a huge impact on your productivity in the sandbox organization. For the sandbox, there are a couple of questions that I'd have you ask if you find that your organization is a sandbox. Do we need more structure, right? Have we outgrown this stage of our organization? Do we need more structure in terms of architecture or process? Secondly, I'd ask, can you maintain that flexibility while increasing predictability? Right? So the sandbox is highly unpredictable. That's because you can come up with something new and execute and iterate so quickly that you can't know exactly where you're going to be 2 and 3 weeks down the road. That could be a good thing, but as you're growing, can you keep that flexibility while increasing predictability and decreasing risk? So sandbox organizations, like I said, Valve is a great example of the sandbox, and almost every early stage startup you'll see, until about 15 or 20 people even, might be a sandbox. By the way, I'll I'll put this slide deck up both as a resource in the class, and I'll put it up as a slide share slide deck. So you all have access to the slide deck. You don't have to worry too much about keeping notes here. Okay, so what's our next organization mode? So the next mode is the mode of the fractal. I'm going to take a second here and see if I can induce anyone out there in Twitter to tweet at me what they think a fractal is. How do you define a fractal? A fractal is actually a term that mathematicians use in similar and different ways from us lay people. But even mathematicians have a difficult time defining fractals always. So I'm going to give you just a couple of seconds here. I'm going to take a drink of water. Hopefully I'll have one or two brave souls tweet me a quick answer. What do you think a fractal is? Or at least a fractal in terms of organization design. You all should feel free to email me between sessions and let me know if this is annoying that I'm stopping to try and get some participation, make it a little bit more interactive, or if you'd like that, and I'll continue to do it. Trying things out. This is my first online Skillshare, so hopefully we're having fun with it. So, what are fractals in mathematics? Fractals are actually defined as self-similar patterns. Self-similar means they look the same from near and far. So you can zoom in or zoom way out, and you'll actually see the same pattern. And there are lots of natural instances of a fractal. So a coastline, for instance, will look like a fractal. So everywhere along the coastline, if you're right up on the sand or you're out in space, it's going to have this similar looking pattern. Same thing for a mountain. If you look at a small rock or little crag in a mountain, it might look like a miniature mountain, that pattern from way up close, and from way afar, the mountain will also look similar in pattern. We have Nancy writing in on Twitter for fractal. Independent units floating freely. I like it. Thank you. Another example of a fractal in nature is a fern, right? So a fern, actually computers can draw ferns really, really well because they're just mathematical representations. They're self-similar. If you take a little bit of a fern off and you look at it under a microscope, it will actually look like a larger fern. So ferns are also fractals. The reason why I used fractal as the image for this model, this mode of organization design, is because when you have fluid architecture, but you have standardized processes, you'll find that your organization works in a similar way no matter what level you're at. It could be a low-level project team or a high-level strategic planning team, but those processes that you've set and that you all have bought into will allow you to work similarly at all levels of the organization so that everybody will be familiar and understand how people work together in your organization. So you don't need titles necessarily, you don't need hierarchy to understand how people report, relate to each other, how decisions are made. Those decisions have been made through process. And so it's going to be self-similar. It's a self-similar organization at all levels. So high level, low level, you're going to have a very similar organization. Look at this, we have a couple more tweets in here. So Adam writes in, a fractal is structured chaos. I like that because there's a real important difference here between chaos and randomness. So in the mathematics of chaos, influences my thoughts on organization very much. There's a very important difference between random and chaotic, right? So chaotic is this tension between probability and determinism. So there is chaos there, but there's some order to the chaos. Even though if it's not predictable, there is some order to it in the chaos, this tension between probability and determinism, whereas randomness is just what it says, it's random. Tom writes in, sounds like a classroom, standardized processes with a lot of parts for the fractal. We've got a fractal organization design would be a self-repeating structure, assigning responsibility for a task to an individual. That was Peter, and that's a great answer. I like it. We have another question. This one isn't about a fractal, but it asks, will the slides have the text that I'm saying as well, or just the pictures? The slides will have my notes. I'll leave those in there, but I'm not really repeating. Hopefully it doesn't sound like I'm reading off of a script. It might, though. It's hard when I can't see all of your faces to react very spur of the moment. But some of this I'm reading off of a script. Most of it I'm not. But I'll definitely have my speaker notes included in the slides. And you'll also have this recording, hopefully this is recording. That'll be up on my YouTube channel. You'll be able to access that as well. Thank you, Laura, Peter, Tom, Adam, and Nancy, all for writing in. I appreciate it. It makes my job a little bit more, a little easier, more fun when I have a little bit of interactivity at least. So what does a fractal organization look like? In practice, I can give you a couple of examples. Gore. So the maker of Gore-Tex, they do materials, and you probably, some of you have heard of Gore and some of you not so much. Gore is a classic management case study because of the way they worked, the way they work. They're incredibly successful, but they're really a self-organizing team in a lot of ways. Now, they have a bit more structure, my understanding is, than what Valve does in the sandbox. But Gore really works on less of a hierarchy, much more in this fractal organization design. Sumall, the organization I mentioned before that I've been working with a lot, I'd say that Sumall works very similarly to a fractal as well. So thinking about more structured, more standardized processes, less formal, more fluid architecture, so that you may be reporting to one person one day, they may be reporting to you for something else the next day. So you have these unpredictable patterns of reporting relationships and decision-making structures, not based on hierarchy, but based on excellence at your job, based on expertise as well. So what are the strengths of this kind of an organization, the fractal organization? The strengths are that the fractal is nimble. It can move quickly. You'll get high employee engagement because you're giving them, your employees, excuse me, your colleagues at your work, you're giving them a lot more ability to take on decisions, to make decisions, to act as they see fit, and empowering them based on their expertise, not necessarily their position in the organization. The weaknesses in the fractal organization that I've seen up close and personal, you can have overlapping roles and unclear authority. And when you have overlapping roles or unclear authority, conflict slows the organization down. People get mired down in trying to figure out who has the right to make a decision. Is decision-making done by consensus? Do we have one person with final say? And those things are places where the fractal organization can oftentimes break down. Now that's just a cue for you all to move forward and to tweak the organization design, to make sure that you're not slowing down, that you can actually be nimble at scale with the fractal by encountering those and those difficulties and heading them off. So the questions I would ask at a fractal organization: how can we give more clarity and empower people without creating a hierarchy? Right? So the great part about the fractal is that you don't have the hierarchy. The difficulty is making decisions and acting and giving people authority. How can you make that authority clear? How can you empower people to make those decisions without creating a hierarchy? And then also, how can you reduce role conflict? So making sure that you know who's responsible, who's going to execute, who has authority to make decisions by reducing role conflict. Getting some feedback here. I appreciate that from Jeff Riddle writing in about doing well. So I guess this is working for some of you at least. So thank you all. The next one that I'd like to talk about, the next mode, is the forest. So when organizations start, right, you're in that sandbox, and you'll hit a point, probably again about 15 or 20 people, where you no longer know what everybody's doing all the time. You no longer have that ability to just look left and right, and you have everybody to your side, and you can quickly get the team together, understand what's going on, and execute together. Now, when you feel that tension that you no longer have that ability, oftentimes what organizations do is they create the world's smallest bureaucracy. How do you go about creating the world's smallest bureaucracy? You take 20 people and you give each of them a title. You create a VPs, and you create presidents, and you create directors, and you have all these reporting relationships for an organization with 20 people. You might have 5 or 6 different functions in your organization for your organization of 20 people. Now that doesn't seem like a great way to go for me. And when Fast Company, you might hear in the background here, I have some cats, so you might hear my cats. Hopefully you all are cat lovers. You're on the internet, so you probably are. Anyway, so for the forest, when Fast Company picked up this the modes model, they talked about how do you create flat organizations at scale. In a thought, don't formalize, fractalize. And I really enjoyed the way that the writer put that, because that's exactly what I was trying to convey. So don't go to the forest, right? Don't formalize those architecture relationships. Don't create a hierarchy where there doesn't need to be one. Fractalize. Go towards that fractal. Understand how you work together. Understand those processes and make sure you're really concentrating on the roles and authority that you're giving people, not the titles and reporting relationships. So examples of this type of organization, unfortunately, academia. So if any of you have ever been in higher ed, you'll find that academia is a terrible, terrible forest at times. Now, a forest can do wonderful things, right? You can hide in the forest, do your own research, and come out with wonderful, exotic, strange, interesting stuff. But it can be a real trek to find your way through the forest, to hack through with a machete sometimes. The U.S. government is another great example, I think, of a forest, right? We have really great, really, let's not say great, but we have very standardized, structured hierarchy. We know the roles. We know the reporting relationships in the U.S. government. But the operational procedures are perhaps less well known. Not in the way that you might think a small startup would be, where there aren't operational procedures. In a large bureaucracy, a bureaucratic setting where you're finding a forest, what you'll find is that you have archaic procedures. Nobody knows why you have these procedures, and certain people have found ways around it. So even if you do have really strong structure and you understand on paper how things should get done, if in action those structures don't really mean anything, especially for a certain group of people who've been there long enough and understand the system implicitly, you're probably growing a forest as well. You're going to have to cut down some of those vines. So the strengths of the forest, there are clear lines of authority, right? So you've created those lines of authority, and it's very helpful at times to make decisions when you have somebody at the top. Another strength is predictability. Forests are usually very predictable. Now, that means they're pretty hard to turn around, though. So the weakness is bureaucracy. You can have confusion. Nobody knows exactly how things are getting done. Nobody understands the underlying reasons why. You might also have a lot of politics in a forest, right? So people who are more well-liked by those in power. People who are more persuasive are going to have more power and more ability to do things, to get things done in the organization, as opposed to the people with the expertise and the good ideas. So with the forest, the questions you want to ask, what outdated processes can we prune from our organization? How can we cut through these vines? And how can we help the best ideas in this organization get more traction, as opposed to the people with the largest voices, the loudest voices? How can we help those with the most expertise get their voices heard most? A couple more tweets here. Brody wrote in kindly linking to the Valve Company Handbook, I believe. So that's great. If you have not read the Valve Company Handbook, it's a little bit long for an online document, but it's a lot of fun. They made their employee handbook tons and tons and tons of fun. And Tyler apparently is also a cat lover. Yeah. So you may or may not have heard the cats in the background. If you haven't, I'm pretty sure you will by the end of these 3 weeks. Hear those cats. Let's move on to our final mode of organization, the hive, right? So the hive is what comes about when you have standardized operational procedures, and you'll have also a highly structured or static architecture. You get that hive. Examples of the hive are the military, right? The military is a hive. Everybody knows how things get done and who's in charge when you're part of a military unit. At least you hope. Same would go for the police or firefighters, right? And these are really important that they are hives, because in an emergency situation, you want to be able to fall back quickly on well-known, well-understood processes and procedures, and you want to know who's in charge, who's giving orders, and you don't have to ask and look around, as you may in a fractal, right? You may have to stop and consider what's happening in a fractal organization. In a hive, you want to be able to execute very quickly, know who's giving those orders, and be really clear and understand what those procedures are. Procter & Gamble, P&G is another example of a hive, right? So even people who have not been a member of Procter & Gamble, you've probably heard the P&G way, right? If your organization is that well embedded, if it's understanding of how the things get done there, that there's a saying that is become part of our culture, really, in terms of business, the P&G way, you're probably a hive because you're so well regimented. And that can be a really great thing. P&G is a monster in marketing. P&G is just a monster. So they've perfected that machine, and they've got that machine going, humming. So Procter & Gamble, the military, really good examples of the hive. Strengths of the hive, very good at repeatable tasks. The hive is also very efficient. So if you're going to be a fast follower or a low-cost provider of a service, you might want to create a hive, right? Because you want to be very, very, very efficient there. And you can create those efficiencies pretty easily, pretty well, given a hive. The weaknesses of the hive, probably slow to innovate, right? If you're not pushing down authority in the organization, if you're not allowing the best ideas to bubble to the top through fairly malleable structures, it's going to be hard for you to innovate quickly as a hive. It's also hard to change directions as a hive. So if you want to innovate and move, you want to change strategy, you want to come up with new products, have your organization pivot, it's going to be difficult as a hive. Much easier as either a fractal or a sandbox to pivot. The questions I'd ask in a hive, is there too much structure? Are we stifling innovation here? How can we encourage more free thinking? Those, I think, are very important questions to ask as a hive. So Nancy writes in with a question, would forest be appropriate, perhaps necessary, for complex organizations? The forest might be appropriate, but I'd say the hive would probably be a better solution most times, right? So as opposed to having archaic procedures that nobody really understands where or why they've come from, you might want to have more structured, standardized procedures so that in your somewhat static hierarchy, at least you understand how things are getting done in the hive. That gives you a better idea, a better understanding of where decisions or how decisions are made, how strategic direction is enacted. So that's the hive. Thank you guys so much for participating on Twitter. It's just oh, I knocked over my webcam. Not that you guys can see me right now anyway, but I should probably put that back up. I like this at least a little bit of conversation that we're having on Twitter. Some interactivity. It's always a lot more fun when it's not just me talking at you. So I'm going to give you a quick preview of what we're going to do next week. That's going to be the AEIOU model, and this is going to help you as a startup or even as a larger organization avoid moving toward the forest, go more towards the fractal or, if necessary, the hive as you get larger. So AEIOU is a model that I've come up with to help you think about what are the different roles, responsibilities, authority, relationships that we need to think about as we're creating reporting relationships, as we're creating structure, as we're creating our organization design. So, A, you have to think about who is accountable, right? A. Second thing you want to think about, who is executing for each bit of this work? Who's actually going to be doing the work? So the accountability, who's in charge, where's the buck going to stop, but also who's going to execute. Sometimes those are the same person, sometimes they're different people. I is for input. So if you're actually executing, you're making decisions, you're doing the work, who are you getting input from? Make sure that you actually reach out to people who may have expertise, not only because they'll have good ideas and they'll help you shape your thoughts and your ideas and what you come up with, what you do. Those people also probably have strong desire to be included in some way. So input is really important. O is for oversight. So if we have someone who's accountable, who's holding them accountable for this? That's the person with oversight. And the person with oversight is going to check in, make sure the person who is accountable understands how they're going to be evaluated, and make sure that things are moving in that direction. The person with oversight might also be able to step in and take over and take on that accountability if they see fit. The final one, you, who gets updated. So you is oftentimes left out, right? So if you have an organization and you've made decisions and you're going to move forward and you're actually going to execute and move forward with your projects, oftentimes we have people where there are dependencies, people whose jobs are going to be affected that weren't a part of that decision-making process. You have to make sure from the very beginning you outlined who needs to be updated, whose jobs are going to be affected by the decisions and the execution that we make. Let's stop for a second and check Twitter and see if there are any more questions around. Just a little positive feedback from Nancy. I appreciate that. The organic metaphors are thought-provoking. I find that metaphors, for me, it's just my thinking preference, are thought-provoking. They help me really get at what I mean when I'm talking about these different models of organization, these different modes of organizations. So again, just to repeat, we had those 4 modes, and the modes were based on your organization architecture, which you oftentimes think of as the reporting structure or an org chart, right? That just talks about the different roles and reporting relationships and the way that people are interacting with each other in the organization versus the process, the operational processes of in the organization, right, which is the standard operating procedures, how things get done. And the architecture goes anywhere from fairly fluid to fairly static, and the processes, your operational processes, anywhere from ad hoc to standardized. Okay, and those created our 4 different modes of organization. When you have ad hoc processes and a fluid architecture, you had that sandbox. When you have ad hoc processes and a static architecture, you have the forest. When you have standardized processes and fluid architecture, you have the fractal. And when you have standardized processes and you have static architecture, you have the hive. And those are the 4 general modes that we have for organizations and organization design. Now, obviously, your organization probably doesn't fall squarely in one or the other. You're not going to be a top left hive or a bottom right sandbox or a top right forest. You'll be closer or further from the edges, but thinking about it in this way will hopefully give you guys a way of conceiving and understanding your organization that's helpful in thinking about what are our strengths and where are the areas where we can improve. What are the different questions that we can ask to make this a better organization overall? Okay, so I wanted to quickly go into an applied case. So modes at Sumall. Sumall is one of my clients that I've worked with a lot over the last 2 years, and we really have put a lot of thought into how our organization works and how those architecture and the process at Sumall really come together to create an organization. So I'll quickly go over some thoughts. You guys can ask me questions either through email over the week. You can ask me now on Twitter if you'd like. Whenever you'd like, I'll get to those. But I'd like to talk quickly about high level, how do we implement modes at Sumall? First, we have a question. So is there a best organization design for small companies? So that comes from Peter, and I guess he's also asking about large companies. So I'd say your organization design has to fit the criteria. And next week we'll be going into what are the criteria for organization design. How do we want to measure the effectiveness or the utility of our organization design? And you have to come up with that criteria for yourself. And that criteria will tell you what model of organization you'd like to go towards. I'd say it's more likely for a small organization you'd like to be, if effective, the sandbox is really great, right? It lets you pivot really quickly. So a pre-seed startup or even a seed stage startup where you have, let's say, 10 people or less, you might like the sandbox. Now you want to make sure that for each project you have your AEIOUs understood, but the flexibility of the sandbox can be a really great thing. So I definitely, especially if you're just a founding team, 5 people and less, there's really no need to have standardized procedures yet or any sort of architecture. Any team that I've seen that has prematurely put those things in, I generally think that they're hedging against their relationships with their co-founders. They don't feel as comfortable with their co-founders, so they're trying to impose structure to make sure that their co-founders are doing the right thing, not dropping the ball. So to me, that's diagnostic of a problem. If you've put in too much process or too much structure early on in stage of a startup. So if I'd say early stage startups, you will probably want to be in a sandbox or in a fractal. But again, it's going to depend on your organization's culture and the stage. Later stage or large organizations, I don't know if you can avoid moving to the hive at some point, but you can definitely get stuck in the forest. I'd say, I don't like to make prescriptions, but I'd say the forest is probably the worst place you can end up, almost as a rule. You end up with a lot of bureaucracy in the forest, people get lost, and a lot of politics. So I'd try to stay away from the forest as much as possible. If you're going to have a rigid and static architecture, right, and at scale you may need it, you're going to want to have also really clear understanding of how work gets done, those processes, so that it doesn't seem arbitrary, so that it doesn't seem politically motivated. And there are also organizations who work as, like I said, Valve seems to work as a sandbox at scale. Now they are apparently notorious for late releases, so part of that's not working, but they are incredibly creative. And they have a new product, or not such a new product, but a product that they have, a platform for games, Steam, that is incredibly profitable. They are a huge organization now, very profitable, and they're doing really well, seemingly with the sandbox at scale. And like I said, the fractal at scale, if you look at Gore definitely presents itself as a fractal at scale. Now, I've definitely seen fractals within startups. I've seen really tiny forests in startups, and that can be painful. So I'd say, as much as you can, move towards the fractal, move away from the forest. Got another question coming in from Adam. So, have I ever used the balanced scorecard? I have used the balanced scorecard. I think it's a good tool, but I'm not going to go too much into that because it doesn't directly link to our model for organization design today. But I think that the point holds, though, that you want to have a way of keeping score. So when you're evaluating different organization designs, you want to think about what's going to be the impact on all different facets of our organization. And the balanced scorecard might be a good way to track that. Okay, thanks so much, guys. I appreciate the questions. So, modes at SumAll. So how did we do this? Dane Atkinson, the CEO at SumAll, was pretty clear from the very start, from before SumAll was even a company, that he wanted to create an incredibly transparent, somewhat democratic organization that empowered its employees to really have ownership, and to Dane collected the best people he'd ever worked with, and he didn't want to impose structure on them that would stifle their creativity, that would stop them from being able to use their expertise and really enact and make decisions and be empowered and have the authority to do that. So all along the way, as SumAll was growing, and SumAll's grown to 30+ people now, we had to check in and make sure that the structure was right for each stage of the organization. Excuse me. And so at first, that meant a lot of group process talk. How do we work together in this team? We didn't have titles, we didn't have reporting relationships, but we had to make sure that the team dynamic was taken care of. So again, it was mostly a sandbox at that time. Up until, say, 12 or 13 people, very much worked like a sandbox, but what we concentrated on very intently was that everybody understood what they were responsible for, what they were empowered to do, and the decisions that they were empowered to make. As we grew up a little bit past the sandbox, we moved more towards the fractal. So Dane one day I asked Dane, I said, look, we're growing pretty quickly. We should probably start to think about what the titles in this organization are, who does what, and how. And Dane said, we don't need titles. We have to find a way to make this work so that we don't need to have titles, that formal structure, that almost status symbol that we didn't want to bring into the organization because of the idea that we wanted to keep it flat as possible. We wanted to empower people throughout the entire organization. And we didn't want to create status symbols. We didn't want to create too much differentiation. In order to do that, though, we had to make sure that at scale, right, at a larger scale at least, when we were 15 and 20 and 25 people, that everyone understood their roles, their authority, their responsibilities. So that's when I started to talk about AEIOU, accountability, execution, input, oversight, and update, making sure that everybody understood what their responsibilities were, what their roles were, and how they could relate to one another. And that was a really important part to help us move past some of that chaos that comes from growth. So when you hit that chaos phase, you have to organize. You have to think, how are we going to manage this chaos so that we can produce and expand to the next level? So for us, that was creating a document, really. And it was more the process of creating the document, more getting the buy-in and the understanding and the conversations that happened around creating the document than the document itself. But the document turned out to be a really great tool with us, and that was the roles and authorization document. And within that document, we didn't have titles. We don't have reporting relationships. What we had was, for every employee in the organization, a very clear understanding of what they were accountable for, what they had authority to do, what they had oversight of, all of the AEIOUs. We also had some procedures that we put into place, weekly all-hand meetings. We put in an engineering roundtable was created to help the engineers find time to just sit down at least once a week or every other week and talk about what was going on in engineering. We had a product team that we created so that all the different parts of the organization, from the design team to the front-end team, the back-end team, the marketing team, the business development team, everybody got together to talk about where the product was headed. And so that was a process that we put into place, a structure, to help us manage this fractal organization that we created. And so that's at least a part of how we created organization design at Sumall, how we worked to create more of a fractal and move away from the forest. I had a question here from Amy. For small startups, how do we make sure everyone plays nice in the sandbox without setting too many structures? That is a really difficult question to answer, Amy. That's a great question. So the first thing you're going to have to know is that you have to choose your co-founders wisely. You have to find people who aren't going to be politically motivated and people who are going to want to share power. That is a difficult thing. So first, choose your partners carefully. Secondly, make sure everybody's clear about what they have authority to do, right? So when you're authorizing someone to make a decision, make sure that you're clear on what authority you're giving them as a group, and make sure that the person understands what authority they've been given by the group, to make sure that people's roles don't conflict. Now, that doesn't mean we have to give someone a title, and it doesn't mean we have to set up strict procedures for how we make decisions. We just have to know who owns what. And if we have a very clear understanding of who owns what, and how we expect each other to act with one another, how we hope to be treated, how we hope decisions will be made, create those ground rules. I think ground rules and norms are really important for small groups to talk about from the very beginning. So if you do that and you're really mindful of how you create, another acronym I really like is BART. So your boundaries, authority, role, and task. Think about your boundaries, authority, role, and task together as a group. You're really clear about your expectations with one another. I think you can manage that well as a sandbox. It can be really difficult, though. Great, thank you for that question, Amy. Had a couple of other questions come in before we got together that I wanted to hit, these will, I'll put these up again as speaker notes in my in the slide share, and also in the resource that I post to the Skillshare page. So somebody asked me about, actually a couple of people asked me about Agile and organization design. So Agile development methodology talks about individuals and interactions over processes and tools. Now, to me, there's always process. No matter what you're doing, there's process to it. It's just a matter of whether you've made that process implicit or explicit. So with Agile, if you think about Scrum or stand-up meetings, paired programming, all of those Agile processes are actually process, right? So you don't have to be wedded to one process. You don't have to be a slave to the process, but you do have an understanding of how things will get done. And I think the AEIOU framework works really well within an Agile framework to help you understand what the different roles are for everybody within the team, your Agile team, moving to get the design to get the product launched, to put code in place. So questions you really want to know from within the team and how the team, the Agile team, interacts with the organization at large. Who's doing the planning and who's doing the execution? These are really the architectural concerns for an Agile team. And who's doing the planning and who's doing the execution, that's going to cross the boundaries of your team with the rest of the organization as well, right? Because there's going to be influence from outside of your team from the organization at large. So really understanding who has the authority, who's going to be executing, where's input coming from, who's holding you accountable, who has oversight, and who you're going to have to update. Think of those things and create that as part of your Agile process. I think that will help integrate your Agile process into your organization. And it's really important for Agile teams to have cross-functional, self-organizing teams with project-specific roles. I think that meshes really well with this understanding of a fractal organization. The fractal organization doesn't necessarily even have to have functions in it. But if you do, certainly you're going to want to have a lot of cross-functional communication. And I think that'll happen more organically in a fractal organization. But if you're working in a hive, I think the Agile methodology, especially if you're really cognizant of having a cross-functional, self-organizing team, that Agile methodology can really help you think about creating connections across your functions. And certainly your AEIOUs will help you manage that as well. Another question I got before we came in tonight was around remote teams and organization design. So again, for remote teams, I think we all know the most important thing is to communicate, communicate, communicate. Make sure you're over-communicating. Until somebody tells you you're spamming their inbox or they can't hear another tweet or message or Skype conversation with you, keep doing it. You're not doing it enough until somebody tells you you're doing it too much for a remote team. And so definitely bake those into your processes. Make sure, again, you understand BART, your boundary, authority, role, and task. Make sure you have your AEIOUs down. Those are going to be really important, especially when you're not co-located. So you're going to have to understand exactly how the team works together, exactly how those roles flow into and work with each other. And you're going to want to make sure that your architectural relationships, if you have them, are even more clear. So I put together a blog post, and I can share that with you all if I haven't already in the Skillshare class area. But I had I think it's 8 things that you have to think about when you're working with a remote team. So step 1, communicate, communicate, communicate. You cannot communicate enough with a remote team. Step 2, tool up. So really thinking about what tools are you going to use. Skype is a great tool, HipChat, Asana, all of these different tools that we use every day in our organizations can be incredible tools to help remote teams stay connected. 3, set goals and make sure you check in weekly. So it's really nice to be able to check in at the beginning of the week, say, look, this is what we're going to do, and at the end of the week, this is what we did. It's good practice for every team, but for a remote team, to keep them top of mind, to make sure that everyone in the organization understands, either for an individual who's remote or for an entire team who's remote, what's been done, what will be getting done, and what the impact is that they've had so far. Step 4, make some time to actually get together. And this is really important. Make some time to bring those remote team members into the office whenever you can. And if you can't, make sure you get some video conference. That actual face-to-face interaction, even if it's virtual, is going to really create tighter bonds and make sure that your team is bonding together. And having trust in a team is one of the most, if not the most important thing that you can have. So make time to actually be together. 5, especially when you're having meetings or whenever you're making decisions, make sure you're really conscious of including the virtual team members. Make them part of your process. Make that explicit. 6, and this is really important for people who work remotely, they'll tell you when people aren't on time to meetings, it's really painful, right? Because they'll just sit there and wait. Now, of course, they can do a little bit of work, but they've planned their days and their meetings around those meeting times. And when you're working together in an office, it's very easy for everyone to say, hey, lunch has run over, we noticed people haven't been back, or we're all at lunch together. When you're out at lunch all together and it's running over and you had that meeting set up, the people who are remote don't know that, right? Because they're cut off. Make sure that you're timely, at least as timely as you can be, and make sure to check in with them if you're not going to be on time. Equipment can be a really huge thing, so that's point number 7. Good microphones, good video connections, high bandwidth internet connection on both ends, very, very important. So make sure you get your equipment right, your actual physical equipment, in addition to the tools that you use. And lastly, point 8, during meetings, make sure to check in with the team to make sure you're inclusive. But don't make it alienating how much you're checking in. If you check in with your team that's in person, make sure you also check in with your remote team. If you're going to go around the room, oftentimes we forget that we have people who are remote. So don't just go around the room and ask everyone for their opinions and forget to ask the people who are remote. And I know that sounds really obvious, but it happens more often than you think, where they're just left out, and that can be very painful. I have another question that came in from Tyler. Have I ever put together a decision tree when evaluating org structure? Would you consider it? Next week, we're going to put together a checklist to evaluate our organization structure, so that's going to be really important. So yes, absolutely, you want to put together why are we creating this organization structure, what are the benefits we hope to get, how can we evaluate our different decisions in terms of making decisions around our organization structure. Culture is an important part of that, though. How does your organization structure have an impact on your organization's culture? Will your culture reject the structure you're putting together? Because if they're at odds, it's not going to work out well together. Couple of concluding points before I'll take any questions you have over Twitter again. I want to mention the articles here. Some of those articles are my own blog post, the Fast Company coverage of the blog post, and the Inc. coverage of the blog post. They all had some interesting links within their blog posts as well, which is why I put them up, and some great points on their own. So definitely check that out. You have a billion-dollar company with no bosses. I think that's Valve. That's an article on Valve. But if you have the opportunity, definitely check out the Valve Employee Handbook. Like I said, Brody earlier posted that, I think, for us with the hashtag modes. So you can find it there as well. But definitely check out that article, at least on Valve. And there are a couple of books that I really like for organization design. One is called Competing by Design. That's by Nadler and Tushman. And then the other one is Designing Dynamic Organizations. That one's by Jay Galbraith. All of these are hyperlinked. So if you go to the SlideShare, if you go into the resource pages in the Skillshare class, you'll be able to click through any of those links. And if you have any trouble, of course, you can email me. Next thing I'd like to talk about is your project. So if you have not already, please do take the assessment. The assessment is at joaquinroca.com/structure.html. Take the assessment. Think about the assessment in terms of your current organization, a future organization, or a past organization, one you're creating, one you've worked in. Take the assessment, though, and really give it some thought. Write up your reflections on taking the assessment. Was it surprising? Did it confirm your suspicions? And then include ways your design helps and hinders your company, either the one that you're creating, the one you're currently at, or the one in the past that you're thinking of. So do that. Go through these thought exercises. Write that down and share it with the rest of us. Again, you all can reach me at any time you'd like at me@joaquinroca.com. You can find me on Twitter at Joaquin_V_Roca. on my website at joaquinroca.com. You can also come down to my meetup. I didn't have a link here, but we have a meetup if you're in New York called the People Side, and it's for everybody who's thinking about the people side of startup organizations in New York. So definitely come down there as well. So now I'll escape out of this. I'm back. Let me adjust my webcam. You guys can see me again and hopefully still hear me. And I would love to take any questions that you guys have. We still have 23 viewers, so it looks like I did not bore you to death, although 23 is only about a fifth or a sixth of everyone. Hopefully people who are not here will be able to catch up with us on the video. So let me just look at my Twitter feed, see if we have anything else going on. Check my email really quickly. Nobody emailed me, so that's good. So questions, and if you don't have any other questions, you all can feel free to go. But I'm going to hang out just for a couple more minutes to make sure I didn't miss anybody's questions. Thank you guys so much for participating. I appreciate the tweets, everybody who tweeted at me. Make sure to work on your project for next week. Do that preliminary step of taking your structure assessment, thinking through those questions I posed. We'll pick it up next week. We'll talk about more deeply the actual organization design work. We'll talk about AIOU and think about different ways of organizing your organization. Functional designs, think about product designs, process designs, lots of different things that you can do to think about your organization design. Looks like I have a question. Thank you, Jody, for the question. I guess it wasn't a question, it was just a thanks. Thank you, Jody, for making this an amazing session as well. I appreciate that. And yeah, we're going to be taking this over the next couple of weeks, putting them into action. Hopefully some of you are building your own organization. Some of you have already done that and have the ability to create some change in your organization for good. And like I said, I'm here to help, guide you, give you some resources, and answer any questions I can. So thank you, Jody. Alberto. Oh, wait a second. Sorry about that. Sorry, I keep knocking down my webcam. Bravo, I found you. Glad you found me. Glad you enjoyed the session, Alberto. Thank you. Adam Brody, just retweeting somebody. Thank you so much for coming down. It's always good to hear from familiar face. Hope everything's going well out there. I hope you all become familiar faces soon, but a couple of these people are people I know not only through Skillshare and the internet, but through real life. So I appreciate you all coming down and participating and asking questions. So I'll give you guys a couple more minutes, but you can feel free to head out and have dinner. Hopefully you all have been eating while I'm talking. I'm definitely going to eat pretty soon. And like I said, I'm really hopeful that this was actually recorded. It'll go up on my YouTube channel, and I'll be able to post a link to the Skillshare class as well. Again, any feedback that you have for how the session went, please let me know. If you want more interactivity, I can do my best to incorporate that. I'll figure out a way. If you want less interactivity, if you felt that the tweets and the questions was distracting, I can do a little bit less of that as well. But I will definitely be back next week, and I'm looking forward to seeing you all as well. Can people still sign up for the last 2 sessions is a question. Honestly, I don't know. You'll have to... I'll give you the link, and hopefully we'll be able to get them in. I don't know how Skillshare does that, if it's closed now or not. I don't think it is. I think people can sign up, but I'm not sure. But thank you for that question, Amy. Thanks for the feedback, Howard. Great session. I appreciate that. Down to 15 viewers. 15 of you are still here, so you must have questions. It just went up to 16 for some reason. So somebody came back. So if you have questions, hopefully you tweet them at me, or you can send it to me via email now. I actually can check my email, so if you're more comfortable with email, I can do that as I'm flipping back and forth in my screen here. I've been using my little tablet to track the tweets as I went through. It seemed better than flipping back and forth in my screens here. Okay. Well, doesn't look like I'm getting any more questions, so I'm going to call an end to the session. Again, please feel free to reach out to me at any time at my email, me@joaquinroca.com, through Twitter @Joaquin_V_Roca, or through my website. You can come and check out the stuff I have there, joaquinroca.com as well. Thanks, everybody, and I hope to see you again next Wednesday.